Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. We're thrilled to have with us Senator Angus King, independent senator from the great state of Maine. And in his rearview mirror there is Abraham Lincoln, very appropriate for the times. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. Lincoln once said, Jen, that every political thought he ever had came from the Declaration of Independence, and every political thought I ever had came from Lincoln.
Very good. Now, I know you have been, like many Democrats and many independents, and even some Republicans, very concerned about the accumulation of executive power, in part taken from the Congress. Talk to us in general terms, on a little bit of a philosophical level, what has concerned you so deeply?
Well, when the framers of the Constitution were putting together the structure of our government, they very deliberately separated the power. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't just an idea to make it cumbersome or slow, which, by the way, it is. It was absolutely purposeful because they knew that when you have all power in one set of hands, it's dangerous. Doesn't matter who it is. And this was a fundamental premise of the Constitution. And it's not, Jennifer, it's not about holding on to the Senate have its power and the House has its power. This is about protecting the freedom of the people. Madison in the 47th Federalist said, when you have executive, legislative, and judicial power in one set of hands, that's the perfect definition of tyranny.
Absolutely.
And so what we're talking about is much deeper than a political discussion. It's not about immigration or whatever. It's about the fundamental structure of our government. And that's what's being violated right now. And the Congress is absolutely supine, is just letting it happen.
Absolutely. One of the great one of the great ways that this has been exhibited is in tariffs. The Congress has given away the power of tariffs to the president, and now he has run amok with it. Talk to us a little bit about the economic impact. Maine is obviously on the Canadian border. It has a great deal of interchange with Canada, but also internationally. How is that affecting the state of Maine? And what, if anything, is the Senate going to do about it?
Well, it's going to affect the state of Maine very significantly because we have a huge amount of trade back and forth with Canada across our border. Our longest border is with New Brunswick and Quebec. We're the only state in the country, Jen, that only borders one other state. Because most of our border is with Canada. So there's we have family connections, we have businesses, we have people going back and forth. Lobsters are caught in Maine. Many of them are processed in Canada. They come back. But there's a deeper problem in that the actions of the president have so soured the relationship. One of Maine's big interchanges with Canada is tourism. We have regions on our coast where people from Canada have been coming for generations, and they're not coming this year. I talked to some people in hospitality in Maine yesterday. Bookings at some of the hotels on our coast are down 80% from last year because the Canadians are just pissed off and they're angry, and it's hard to make Canadians pissed off, but they are really irritated. So it's going to hurt Maine. It's going to hurt the country. But you said an interesting thing. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, expressly gives to Congress the power to control tariffs. Now, Congress gave it away, but not entirely. What they did was delegate to the president the power to do tariffs in cases of emergency. And the theory was that if you needed to do a tariff in a situation in a war, for example, that you wanted to be able to act quickly and give the executive that power. But the president has abused that power by defining anything as an emergency. And he says it's an emergency and therefore we need all these tariffs. He talked about an emergency to justify this worldwide tariff when we had the strongest economy in the world. It's hard to find an emergency when you have the strongest economy in the world. And you screw it up by imposing these tariffs. So the damage will be really significant. And I understand tariffs. I wrote a piece years ago about tariffs. I understand tariffs when you're dealing with a country that's way different, has way different standards. In other words, if their workers are being paid $1 a day and they don't have any environmental standards or labor standards, I get that. I think tariffs are appropriate in that setting. It's unfair to have our companies competing in that situation. However, if it's a country like Canada or the EU or other countries that are roughly on our same level of standard of living, all it is really going to do is drive up prices here, I think, dramatically and across the board. And the idea that we can just be an island, that's what they thought back in the 1890s. And ultimately, as you know, the Smoot-Hawley tariff contributed significantly to the Great Depression.
Absolutely. So what about the senators, the Republicans? A few of them rather had joined Democrats in a resolution regarding Canada, but is there enough of them to actually try to recapture this power entirely, to override the large number of tariffs? What are your Republicans saying? They used to be free traders. They used to think that tariffs were taxes. What are they saying now?
Well, they're saying whatever Trump tells them in many cases, but just yesterday, Maria Cantwell and Chuck Grassley introduced a bill to pull the tariff power back to the Congress, which I thought was interesting that Grassley was a lead sponsor of this bill. So there is some sentiment on that. But to go to the deeper issue, Jen, to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, I've been very disappointed that my Republican colleagues have stood by and watched power. I used to say ooze to the executive, but it's not. It's just the executive is jerking it away, deciding which funding laws they want to follow, deciding which agencies get to live or die. That's not the power of the president.
Right.
The Article 2 of the Constitution, the principal job of the president is as follows: to see that the laws are faithfully executed, not choose which laws are to be faithfully executed, not ignore which laws, but to execute the laws that Congress passes. And what's going on, Jennifer, is the gathering of power in the hands of one person. And as I said at the beginning, that's not only dangerous, this isn't a political thing, this is dangerous for the freedom of our people. The next step after that is a dictatorship.
Right. There's another way in which Trump is trying to seize power, and we have a federal system, and that is to grab it back from the states. And they've introduced this SAVE Act, which is really to save authoritarianism, not to save democracy, that would impose all kinds of strident federal rules on elections, which states have traditionally managed. The Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, said if that came over to the Senate, he would lead a filibuster. What's your sense of whether Republicans are really willing to embrace this very extreme measure, and if you'll have enough votes to block it if it comes over?
I have to say it's kind of rich, because 2 or 3 years ago, when we were fighting to restore voting rights, the mantra was, this is a state matter. They could do it themselves. The federal government should not be involved in voting issues. And now all of a sudden, it's the federal government should take over and tell the states what to do. These folks believe in states' rights, except when they don't.
Exactly. So last question as we reach the end of our time. The president has seemingly attempted to retaliate against your state, among other things, requiring people to personally appear at Social Security offices. What is that about? And is there some way of preventing, frankly, ordinary people who may not have the ability to drive miles and miles to sign up for Social Security, a guarantee that their benefits are going to be preserved?
Well, this goes back to the White House conference with the governors when our very able governor had the temerity to challenge the president. She didn't really challenge him. She wasn't rude. She just said, I'm going to follow the law of my state. And, the end of the exchange was, see you in court. And he just took great umbrage at that and has moved in 3 or 4 different ways to punish Maine explicitly. They closed down our Sea Grant program, one of 24 states. We were the only ones. They brought it back. They made this rule on Social Security that made it harder for people to register their children, or if they were seniors, to register for Social Security. They reeled that back after a huge backlash. They've now, I think just in the last couple of days, they've announced that they're freezing agriculture funds and education funds in Maine. That gets back to what I'm talking about. That's not the rule of law. That's authoritarianism. That's the leader striking out against anybody that offends him personally. And that's just not the way our country is going. And people in other states should pay attention to this. And I hope they realize how dangerous it is, and not that they'll cave into it, because it's just one more step. And we didn't even talk about Doge and all the firings and the illegal firings and the irrational way that's been pursued. But Jennifer, this is a very dangerous moment. This is we are in the midst of the most serious assault on our Constitution in the history of this country. And it's happening right before our eyes. And people need to stand up and say, the Constitution is more important than my party, than my president, than any particular politician. Because one thing I've learned in Washington is what goes around comes around. And all this power going to the executive, these same people are not going to like it if 4 or 8 years from now there's a president of another party that has all that power. It's dangerous for our country, has nothing to do with politics, and we ought to put a stop to it.
Well, thank you very much. As many of you know, Senator King is not an alarmist. So when he rings the alarm bell, things really are serious. So good luck in your efforts to hold the line and preserve democracy. And we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Pleasure to be with you.